Hello, my name is Keenan Newton. I'm a SharePoint Product Marketing Manager for SharePoint developers. And this is going to be the first part of introducing the new app model for SharePoint 2013. We're going to discuss some of the new features and new capabilities of the app model to kind of get an idea of what capabilities are there. The new cloud app model for SharePoint is designed not only to address issues around the solution package approach to SharePoint customizations, but also to introduce new capabilities. Apps for SharePoint do not live in SharePoint. Rather, they execute in the browser or in a non-SharePoint server such as IIS or in the cloud like Windows Azure. Apps are granted permission into SharePoint sites via OAuth and communicate over the new investments in the REST and client-side object model APIs. Developers will be able to publish their apps to a public store for download and purchases. In addition, organizations will be able to create a private store known as the App Catalog, where the apps they create will be made available within their organization. Apps now introduce a philosophical change in how developers extend SharePoint. Apps for SharePoint provide a robust platform for creating solutions for SharePoint. For instance, unless the developer has put a lot of forethought into upgrading and uninstalling of their apps, the overall uninstall and upgrading experience in SharePoint prior to SharePoint 2013 was not that great. SharePoint 2013 changes that, with a robust infrastructure to support upgrade and uninstallation of apps. The upgrade story now for apps in SharePoint 2013 also ensures that if an app upgrade fails, it is rolled back so the site isn't left in a bad state. Apps for SharePoint are targeted towards end users. The SharePoint store is an attractive experience for end users to acquire apps. Apps are validated by Microsoft to ensure people can acquire and install apps without worrying that they will steal their data. Apps always ask users and administrators for permission to access the site and the content located on the site. IT staff can elect to permit their SharePoint instance to allow users to install apps from the SharePoint store, or they can prohibit it. IT can also see what apps are installed and running within their SharePoint implementations, as well as looking at the health and reports of the apps. Apps for SharePoint are also cloud and web oriented, and where they leverage the best of the best on the web and run within SharePoint, while also distributing out the app resource requirements and not necessarily dependent on SharePoint. One of the key changes in SharePoint 2013 is now everything is treated as an app. That includes lists, libraries, custom apps purchased from the store, apps that are located from the app catalog. Everything is an app. The actual implementation hasn't changed. They are just referred to as apps for a more uniform experience for end users. You can easily find apps by going to the site contacts link and look at the SharePoint store and the app catalog for apps that you can install within your SharePoint instance. When you select an app then redirects you to the app start page where the actual app is located. Let's go ahead and take a look at the basic app for SharePoint architecture. You can see SharePoint can communicate with other services such as Windows Azure or SQL Azure via REST and OData-based services. Apps running from within an isolated SharePoint app web or on a remote infrastructure such as Windows Azure communicate back to SharePoint using the same REST and client-side object model APIs, gaining permissions to SharePoint sites using Windows Azure Access Control Services. Some key things to point out is, first, the code runs off the SharePoint box. In other words, there's no code running within the SharePoint server itself. It's either running within the client in the browser, or it's running off server in some type of web application server such as IIS or Windows Azure websites or a Windows Azure web role. All the hooks in the SharePoint are declarative, so that way there's no code running within SharePoint itself. An app web provides isolation between the app and the SharePoint site itself. This provides isolation to prevent things like cross-site scripting. Upgrading custom solutions is a common issue when upgrading between versions of SharePoint. In this new app model, because no custom code runs on the SharePoint server, it becomes much easier to upgrade apps. This also makes it easier to work within hosted environments because code is not deployed to the SharePoint server itself.